YouTubers are lying to you about Doctor Who. They're lying to you about all media, in fact. They do it so well that they can trick anyone, and I do mean anyone. The biggest mistake you can make is thinking you're intellectually or magically immune, that you would simply see through it. But like a visual effect, you can really only see through the bad ones, and industry professionals can be fooled by really, really good ones. On that positive note, let's talk about Doctor Who and the message. Are stories being compromised by inserting politics where there previously were none? Is modern media bad and failing? And importantly, how to tell if your favorite creators are lying to you for money.
Including us. Stop me if you've heard this one before. Doctor Who was good, but it has been ruined by a forced progressive political agenda. Bonus points if you've heard it in a Scottish accent. This is the message. The conspiracy to indoctrinate by forcing a united political message through art. The internet is full of people telling you this because it's almost true. This narrative thrives on misunderstanding how art works, and Doctor Who's 60-year run gives us a unique window to view this through. We're watching 2024 Doctor Who right now and watching the show take a stance on political issues of the 2020s. It doesn't make sense to force babies to be born if you're just going to leave them to die, says Space Babies. That sure sounds relevant to the current discourse around abortion rights and the lack of support for struggling families. The capitalist fetish of increasing the bottom line and over-dependence on AI to replace human judgment will kill you, says Boom. Technology is putting us in echo chamber bubbles and radicalizing us, says Dot and Bubble. Men suck, says the Star Beast. Okay, that last one was a joke, but you get the point, and you've heard the criticisms, I'm sure. You'd be right to say the first Doctor era didn't take a stance on abortion, at least not to my memory. This was not a priority of the original show, and so this is surely proof of the message at work, right? Well, let's consider for a second what was on the public consciousness in the 60s when Doctor Who began. It's only been 18 years since the Nazis were defeated, and their cold, industrialized crimes are still ringing in the ears of the generation who either fought or grew up in the war. 18 years since the atomic bomb was revealed to the world, its destructive power simultaneously rebranding itself as the future of safe energy as the emerging superpowers who hate each other race to build larger stockpiles of more atomic weapons to guarantee victory in the upcoming potential nuclear war. People had opinions about these things, values even, and some of those people were writers. One writer, Terry Nation, created the Daleks, cold, inhuman creatures who are unconcerned with the value of life and demand, above all else, racial purity. Creatures born from the fallout of nuclear war. We learn about this tragic planet brought to ruin by the power of the atom, and despite our heroes being introduced to both sides and their beliefs, a specific side is chosen and advocated for. Not only does Doctor Who decide what's right and wrong, but our heroes have to convince literal pacifists to fight for what's right. Fascist racial purity is wrong might not feel as controversial as the talking points of modern Who, but that's only because we're taking for granted that this is history. Racial purity and fascism did not begin with the Nazis, nor were they destroyed with the Nazis. The American Nazi Party was formed just 4 years before this episode would air. To be clear, I am not saying if you dislike Doctor Who now, or have issues with its messaging, that you are similar to the Nazis. But to a Nazi or a racist, of which there were no shortage of in the 60s, the Daleks episode is pushing a woke leftist agenda on a modern cultural talking point.
Yes, but why destroy without any apparent thought or reason?
Oh, there's a reason. It's stupid and ridiculous. A dislike for the unlike.
Let's not even talk about how the nuclear activists felt. Their battle's gonna get a lot harder in about 23 years. So if that's the case, why does it feel different now? When we re-watch these older episodes, we don't automatically insert ourselves into the dominant and emerging discourse of the time, and that gives us a sort of blindness to the stances that the show is taking. Some people might argue that there's a difference between the old show's education and the newer show's propaganda. When you go out of your way to place yourselves into the conversations of the time, we find out that this is not the case, and suddenly things start sticking out a lot more. You might not think of fan favourite Sarah Jane Smith as a social justice warrior, but she was introduced in 1973 specifically to be a second-wave feminist who very vocally advocates for women's liberation and equality, and is understood by the show to be correct. Even when her inner biases cause a slip-up, she's immediately corrected by another woman of authority.
I hadn't expected male chauvinist attitudes from you, Miss Smith.
Think for a second how many YouTubers would rush to the microphone if this exact line was made and delivered in the next Marvel movie. Even that aside, the idea of changing the show formula to make our female companion a competent career woman was a divisive decision in traditional households who were raising their girls to be housewives and mothers. We laugh today about how Sarah Jane was still often reduced to a damsel in distress, or how Russell T Davies brought her back in 2006 for a gag where two girls fight for a man's affection, but Sarah Jane was a progressive character for the time who pushed the progressive message of the time. She is the message. But if you watched her when you were younger or grew up after that time, you're probably not understanding the conversation being had between the art and the audience. You're probably taking for granted that women do get to be more than housewives. And you see the negative attitudes portrayed as historical or educational, but they weren't at the time. At the time, anti-feminists would call this propaganda. It only becomes education once it's history, but in the present, it is a clash between forces, and the show has taken a side. Now, Doctor Who is 60 years old. We don't have time for every blatant message, but let's rattle off a few as a quick exercise. The Sixth Doctor tells us in the 80s during the Cold War that the government is corrupt and will betray you for their own personal agenda, and that absolute unregulated power will rot people and institutions to the core. 4 years into the War on Terror, the Ninth Doctor emerges as a broken veteran who tells us that there are no winners in war, everyone loses. Everyone suffers, it's always wrong. He also blew up a mass weapons manufacturer. In an era of record-breaking corporate profits and low wages for workers, the 12th Doctor shows us that capitalist corporate structures don't value life more than they value money and will kill you for their bottom line.
The end point of capitalism. Like every worker everywhere. We're fighting the suits.
This episode is the canonical end of capitalism for humanity in Doctor Who. In the dystopian Amazon warehouse world we live in, the 13th Doctor tells us that capitalist corporate structures are good actually, and it's the disempowered working class individuals who are the problem because they won't work within the system that has complete dominion over them. Oops, that's actually a very conservative message to push. Don't ever let them tell you that 13 was the woke one. As the arguments for controlling the reproductive rights of women were raging on, Russell T Davies penned an episode with a line about how it doesn't make sense to force childbirth with no intention to care for or help that life flourish or even survive. And of course, a return to our old favourite, capitalism is bad and capitalist corporate structures will kill you. These are all conversations taking place between the art and the audience. But if you were too young to notice or have been watching these episodes long after release, it can feel like the new stuff is just too blatant, too in your face about it. But that's how it's always felt to experience this art at the time of its release. Once again, it's only history once it's in the past. Racial purity and racial supremacy is wrong was an in-your-face message in 1963.
They're afraid of you because you're different from them. So whatever you do, it doesn't matter.
The oppression of women is real and must end was an in-your-face message in 1973.
Women's liberation, Your Majesty. It means that we women don't let men push us around.
The ruler is always a man. It's Autran who holds the real power.
Well, and if you let him, you've just got to stand up for yourself.
What you feel right now and what dishonest YouTubers prey on is the result of being old enough and aware enough to identify an author's beliefs or stance through their writing. And that's not to say that clumsy or even condescendingly bad writing doesn't exist. A good story conveys its points. A bad story has the Doctor look right into the camera and tell you that climate change is not very good and will kill us if we don't do anything about it. Factually true, poorly written. But as internet dwellers, our ability to properly read and critique art is under attack by content creators who are paid to reduce your critical thinking faculties to nothing. If you think that Orphan 55 is a bad episode because of the message or propaganda, you may be a victim of this assault on critical thinking. So let's talk about critical thinking.
It feels necessary because the online discourse around media is so polluted with incorrect understandings that even the term media literacy feels gross for me to say because of how often I see it incorrectly defined by media illiterate people. Allow me this quick explanation and then we can get into the YouTube drama that you clicked on this video to see, I promise. In the simplest terms, at the most core level, I want you to look at the people producing the art and find the 5 answers. Who, what, when, where, and why.
Or, for our purposes, Doctor Who, Doctor What, Doctor When, Doctor Where, and Doctor Why.
Who made this? What is the message being conveyed? When was it made, and how might that inform it? Where was it made, and how might that inform it? Why was it made, or why was it made like this? You can take those answers and project them against the social discourse of the time. Specifically, the dominant values, the most publicly held common beliefs on a given topic, and the emerging values, the beliefs on the same given topic which are growing in popularity. The Moonbase is a Doctor Who serial famous for delivering one of the second Doctor's iconic lines.
There are some corners of the universe which have bred the most terrible things, things which act against everything that we believe in. They must be fought.
People love this line. It was a window into the Doctor's core principles. Anyway, 48 years later, the 12th Doctor said,
When you fire that first shot, no matter how right you feel, you have no idea who's going to die. How much blood will spill until everybody does what they were always going to have to do from the very beginning? Sit down and talk!
And that's quite a different message. In the narrative we know, his opinions have changed because of certain things he's experienced. But the writers chose for him to have this belief, and they chose for it to change. And the critical thinking process will help us understand why. The second Doctor was controlled by writers who lived through the Second World War. That's the Who. What it's saying is that we must fight that which acts against our values. It was made in 1967, 22 years after World War II and during a time of international debate about the Vietnam War. That's the when. Where was it made? In the United Kingdom, of course, which famously took a never surrender approach to World War II. Why was it made? As well as needing to appeal to the target audience, it was written like this to convey, through our hero, that the writer agrees with this sentiment. If that line came from a villain, it would be doing the exact opposite. They want you to know that this message is moral and correct.
Some places in our world produce things which act against our beliefs. They must be fought.
It is completely pro-war. This makes sense, coming from the people who lived through World War II under the direct attack of the Axis powers. Their collective resistance and persistence in the war for the greater good were important and dominant values to that generation. The choice to include this line suggests that the creative team still held these values and were not sympathetic to anti-war beliefs held by some during the war. It also suggests that the writers didn't feel that this ideology would isolate their target audience of like-minded UK citizens. This ideology is repeated and reinforced in the Second Doctor's final moments too.
We have accepted your plea that there is evil in the universe that must be fought.
There's a lot more that can be extracted from this information, but let's pivot now to the new Who Doctor, who doesn't seem to like war all that much.
Created by Russell T Davies, who was actually born the same year as Doctor Who, which is a little fun fact you can take home for free. That's our Who. What does this new portrayal convey? That war is terrible, of course, and that it takes a severe toll on even its survivors. When? In 2005, 4 years into the War on Terror. Where? In the UK, who were participating in that war. Why? Because Davies felt that the character needed to be reimagined as a modern man for a modern audience. And that tells us that he believed this anti-war sentiment was not only popular, but, as conveyed through the character, correct. Remember that little fun fact about Russell T Davies? Well, I tricked you. It doesn't matter that he was born alongside Doctor Who, it matters that he grew up alongside anti-war sentiment. Entering his teenage years just after the Vietnam War ended, he lived through the first time we were able to look back on war in clear colour footage and reckon with what had really taken place. He saw global tensions rise in the Cold War, he saw the Berlin Wall come down peacefully. His values, like everyone's, have been informed by his environment. So, obviously, Russell T Davies created a peace advocate doctor, a veteran crushed and damaged by the war machine who despised war with every fibre of his being. Under Stephen Moffat, who was only about 2 years older than Davies, this same peace advocate doctor would deliver that iconic anti-war monologue in an episode about xenophobia, an immigration crisis, and the youth being radicalised into terrorism.
I forgive you. After all you've done, I forgive you.
The character changed his tune from
They must be fought.
and we can read that in the dominant values of the two eras, and we can read those values through the messages that the writers are conveying.
With just a basic introduction into critical thinking and media literacy, we're joining the conversation between the art and the world it was created in. But this is a YouTube video, and statistically speaking, you're not even watching this. So let's complain about propaganda.
All art necessarily conveys something from the artist, because every decision an artist makes is consciously and subconsciously informed by their experiences, beliefs, and values. Doctor Who has always taken sides. It has always had morals embedded within. Sometimes well written, sometimes not. Good analysis helps us interpret an artist's intent or worldview. We can read their values, which are intrinsically baked into everything they create. But bad analysis makes you a lot of money. I told you that YouTubers were lying to you about Doctor Who, so let's explore why they lie, how they lie, why it works, and how it intentionally destroys critical thought. We live in an attention economy. You only have so many seconds to spend alive, and the more of those seconds that companies can take for themselves, the more money they can make with their various monetization practices. We know that outrage statistically creates more engagement time, more attention, more money. Enter the lying content creators. They don't have an incentive to create intelligent discourse on a topic. They are being paid to create basic bumper sticker replacements for discourse which can be easily spread, easily argued about due to their vague simplicity, and that makes them all the more viral. But why just be a flash-in-the-pan con artist when you could weave your bumper sticker keywords into a cohesive narrative that will keep the viewers coming back for updates on the saga? These narratives are, more often than not, regardless of political persuasion, made from the top down. A creator starts with a stance, chooses the direction that the show or franchise is on, and then looks for ways to validate it after the fact. Preaching the message or the agenda is so perfect because all you have to do is prove to people that art conveys meaning, which is true, and leave out that it always has. Because art conveys, these con artists can always prove intent to deliver meaning while lying or obscuring the intended meaning with poor analysis. A good example of poor analysis is actually with transphobe tubers who say "stunning and brave," a line taken from a South Park episode nearly a decade old about Caitlyn Jenner. It's such a self-report for bad analysis because that episode is criticizing a lack of nuance in the public discourse. The idea that we are so simple that we can't reckon with the fact that Caitlyn Jenner is, in the author's opinion, a terrible human regardless of her gender, and that criticisms of her shouldn't automatically be considered criticisms of her identity or transition.
I just said she isn't a hero to me. I didn't like Bruce Jenner as a person when he was on the Kardashians, and I don't suddenly like him now. Her, yes!
Nah, throw that nuance out the window. Betray the message of the source material you're pulling from, and remember to say "stunning and brave" in all of your videos and in all of your thumbnails every time there's a trans actor, character, or gender non-confirming occurrence in Doctor Who. Slap on some half-truths like that the live broadcast views are down, and disregard the fact that the show now airs first on Disney+, one of the largest global streaming services on Earth. When you get called on that, tell them that these streaming numbers are bad too and cite the BBC iPlayer, and disregard the fact fact that Disney Plus is one of the largest global streaming services on Earth and does not publish viewership data. Who cares if there's a massive hole in your data collection? It's not like you needed the data for your predetermined conclusion. And you don't want to encourage a culture of fact-checking within your community. You don't want your community to expect you to substantiate or to elaborate the declarations that you rapid-fire off to stretch the video runtime. You want your community to start with your conclusion and work their way backwards to it, guaranteeing that they don't engage with the media in any way that doesn't correlate to the message you're pushing. Don't teach them to look for an artist's message, teach them to find your message. The Devil's Chord isn't a bad episode because of its scale, which seems to be too large for the runtime, for its odd pacing and dependence on a previous story for the setup and a future story for the payoff. It's your financially backed agenda to spread the word that the episode failed because the inhuman horror uses they pronouns, and audiences hate that. They're portrayed by a drag queen, and audiences hate that too. Now, you don't have any data for this, but with the right audience, you don't need to. You can prove this is the message in action because the author is progressive and has said in interviews that there will be a focus on progressive representation. You can assert your narrative that a focus on the author's principles come at the expense of the story, but to prove that, you would actually need to engage in analysis. But no analysis has taken place. We haven't thought about what the story is conveying at all. We haven't interpreted the text. We've only discussed the surface level details and how they fit into your pre-established narrative that you're selling to your audience. Just like that, you have another hit video to add to your cinematic YouTuberverse playlists that keep your watchers coming back to tune in for the next chapter of slop. To be clear, this trend is followed by people of all political persuasions. Don't take our recent Doctor Who examples to be a condemnation of a specific side. The war here is against total media illiteracy. So please, put art and creators to the critical thinking test. Once you have a conclusion, challenge it yourself using the same method you used to find it. You might realize you've overlooked something, or that you have multiple possible interpretations that you have to weigh against each other using your critical thinking skills. That last part is also pretty helpful in saving yourself from conspiracies. Yes, we make money on YouTube. Yes, our Scavengers Reign video views drastically increased when the initial plans for a second season were cancelled. No, we didn't get Scavengers Reign cancelled. Criticism of Doctor Who, among a lot of other properties, is so strangled by these content creators who trick thousands of people into thinking that critical thinking is when you're thinking and critical of something. We get so used to hearing the message from these creators that we put their methods to work, engaging with every new episode with either the intent to specifically prove or specifically disprove the bumper sticker and barely tangible arguments that they artificially inflate the public discourse with. When there are hot topics like bi-generation, nobody talks about the theme or meaning conveyed. They are preloaded with their own bumper sticker retorts to the bumper sticker arguments they're expecting to hear from you. It completely erodes our ability to intelligently engage with the artist and with each other. We're fighting imaginary battles instead of reading into the text. We're replacing thoughtful discourse entirely with simplified surface-level react culture stoked by creators who don't stand to make money for their analysis, but from their narratives and the message that they spread. So, the structure of the internet tips in favor of people who are selling you meta-narratives about art and who substitute analysis for overly simplistic surface-level readings of a text with a pre-established agenda. What next? Honestly, I hope the biggest takeaway from all of this is that the basic pillars of critical thinking that we've established and demonstrated are applicable to both artist and critic. We've demonstrated how Doctor Who has always chosen a side, that it's always had messages woven into its story because that's how art fundamentally works. We've explored the incentive and strategy behind turning critical thinking into a buzzword that means to think and be critical. Both conclusions have been reached with real analysis and real critical thinking. And those basic pillars of critical thinking are applicable to all things creative. And I hope that you'll use them to put everything you consume under the microscope, including us. The next time you watch a video about the fall of this show, the rise of that show, or how this thing is too woke and how this other thing is too problematic, apply these critical thinking principles to that creator. You might find that the YouTuber you've been watching for 3 years is maybe using a lot less analysis than you thought. Who are they, and what do they believe? What is their message? When was this video uploaded? Where is this message aimed? At what communities? Why did they choose to present information or withhold information the way that they have? Are they substantiating anything they say, or are they just making declarations one after another?
Maximize the stressful links! Shatter fry the positrons!
Because we all have a message. We all have an agenda that guides us. Idle Scree is a group of passionate media freaks and artists who want to encourage you to engage passionately and intelligently with art. But we're also YouTubers, which means we have the same financial incentives which could, in theory, threaten the integrity or honesty of our message. We financially benefit from views and watch time, and that actively stresses and bends the structure of our videos around making something optimal as best we can without compromising our vision. We have a Patreon which is being expanded this month, and it would have been statistically more beneficial to mention that earlier in the video before you clicked off, but we felt it would compromise the message that we're trying to convey. Every decision we and every other creator makes is influenced by this financial incentive, and you should never take it for granted that any of us will always get it right. So learn to read the message in everything. It doesn't just make stories stronger, it makes your criticisms stronger too. With intelligent, real analysis, we appreciate art on such a greater level than passive face value consumption. You can substantiate your praise and passion on far stronger grounds, and your criticisms can cut right to the core and put to words the bad vibes that most viewers struggle to explain. The ability to not just witness, but join the conversation between the art and the world is so important. And that's our message. Well, that one was a little heavy, and that's just the first part of a 2-part dive into online discourse. Part 2 will focus on the Owl House and how online communities turn you into witch hunters. We hope you'll join us for that. Special thank you to our supporters over on Patreon. They funded this video and they continue to keep the lights on in the Idle Scree dumpster, which we are very grateful for. We've started experimenting with some long-form discussions and breakdowns of particular media things, so if that sounds like something that might interest you, maybe give it a listen and let us know what you think. Thank you to everyone who's watching the live premiere. Going live and hanging out with all of you is absolutely the highlight of the week for all of us. And if you would like to see the next video live with us, you can receive updates as a free member on our Patreon or on our Tumblr so that you never miss another one. We hope to see you there. Thanks for watching.